Hey, Scott, welcome back to the podcast.
Debbie, I'm so honored to be back.
I'm honored that you're joining me again. I remember the first time we talked, I was in the middle of a move back to New York. I was in a temporary apartment, and it was 7 years ago.
No,
It's
stop it.
it really was. It's kind of mind blowing, and life has continued, and you've gone down so many fascinating roads through your work. So I'm very excited to explore
Hmm,
your new work today. And
thank
just,
you.
I'm going to just say this for listeners. When Scott was on the show before, we talked about his book, Ungifted, and
Wow.
it was just a great conversation. I'll have a link in the show notes. Definitely go check that out. You've also written a book between now and then called Transcend, which was about the new science of self actualization. And now your new book, I just finished. I listened to it. So it was really fun to hear you read the book. But it's called Rise Above, Overcome a Victim Mindset, Empower Yourself, and Realize Your Full Potential.
That's right. There's no lies detected there.
Well, what I'd really love to know is kind of what led you in this direction. I know you're like an endlessly curious person, but I really would love to know kind of the journey that brought you to writing this book.
I think over the years, I've reinterpreted my own personal story in many different ways, trying to understand what is it really a story of? Is it a story of intelligence being misdiagnosed? Is it a story of what is it? Creativity, imagination, and that was underappreciated? So the answer to like most things in life is going to be yes, and it's a story of all of that. But it dawned on me, it's also really much a story of me refusing to have a victim mindset. When I was in ninth grade, I was fed up with the special education room and all the constant accommodations when I didn't even want it or need it. Um, it just really fueled me to want to see what I was capable of. And then enough research had amassed that I had conducted on a topic called vulnerable narcissism, which is strongly linked with a victim mindset. That I was like, oh, there's a book here.
I will say, too, you are someone who writes deeply researched work very quickly. It's really impressive to watch from afar. So
Thanks,
pretty
Debbie. That
cool.
means a lot. No book writes itself, of course. Any
Yeah.
author who says that is lying or
Yeah.
has a ghostwriter they don't tell you about. But I personally, I hired an editor for this one. I really wanted to um, make this as accessible as possible. I feel like all my books keep getting more accessible over the years. Ungifted was my least accessible one. No one's reading that unless you're a super nerd. And a parent that's yeah, once that's really a nerdy parent.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, this one I really wanted to make it snap and be entertaining and easily digestible.
Yeah. Well, you did that. You did that. And I really, you and I know each other, in socially as well, and have spent time together. And you brought a lot of you to the audio read as well. So
I did.
it was great. Um,
Thanks,
but
Debbie.
I always like to kind of make sure we're all talking about and thinking about the same things. And
Great.
so we're going to be exploring, the main theme of your book is this victim mindset. So what is a victim mindset?
Oh well, a victim mindset is a dynamic mindset. First of all, it's not who you are. It's not your enduring trait. It's something we can all kind of go in and out of, and some of us stay there longer than others. It's a dynamic mindset where we blame all of our problems on others, external circumstances. We ruminate about something that may have happened to us that is certainly could have been challenging, but we ruminate in a very not productive way. We have a lot of hostility, a lot of resentment, and we don't really move forward with our lives with hope and purpose and agency. And so I wanted to move people to the more empowerment mindset, because I think it's a lot more productive regardless of what we've experienced in our lives.
Yeah. And I think the topic of victimhood or having a victim mindset is super relevant right now, just,
I'd
kind of
say.
in the world, right? But I think I was so interested in this because I was thinking of an episode I did years ago with Dr. Tamar Chansky on freeing your child from negative thinking, right? Which was a lot about cognitive distortions. And you write a lot about that in the book. But I recognize that a lot of our neurodivergent kids can get really stuck in kind of this negative view, and having that victim mentality or that victim mindset. And so I'd love to know, what is it? Is neurodivergence a common thread with someone who has a victim mindset, or what are some of the
No,
commonalities?
no, I mean, I don't think that people who are neurodivergent are more likely to have a victim mindset. I've never seen any data showing that connection. Um, but I think any of us, when we have a challenge in this world, and a lot of neurodivergent individuals obviously view it as not just a gift, but also there's there are real struggles associated with being so different from others. And I think that there's something so natural and human about wanting to um, sort of blame the world for your issues, and to say, well, no one gets me, or the world is against me. I can't belong anywhere. I don't fit anywhere. And as though the world's purpose is to accommodate you everywhere you go, you know?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I don't think people realize the extent. And I think a lot of kids, you have very well meaning parents who are coddling the hell out of these kids. And then when they enter the real world, they expect everyone to be their mother. Now, I wish everyone was my mother. My mother, she makes me the best meals when I go home. If she knows I'm if angry about something, she'll behind my back call the person and be like, "Leave my Scotty alone." Talk about the best advocate in the world is usually the mother or a good father. Let's not
Hmm.
forget good fathers, of course.
Hmm.
But not everyone in the world is your mother, and I think we don't do these kids with neurodivergent issues a great service by setting them up so that they expect everyone to open doors for them, and to have an IEP when you're 50 years old. There's no IEP when you're 50 years old,
Hmm.
and there's no IEP of life. And I've never quite put it that way, but it's true.
Yeah.
And this is not tough love. I talk very much in the book about how my approach is unique. I think I have a unique voice in this space. I'm
Hmm.
not either extreme. I'm not the extreme coddling side, which I just mentioned, but I'm also not the pull yourself up by your bootstraps side either.
Yeah.
I'd like to think there's a third way. I call real. What do I call it? Honest love. Yeah, that's what I call it. I call
Yeah.
it honest love, where we really teach these kids to be realistic about what they can expect, and be realistic as well about what they can expect from themselves. I think we're underestimating a lot of potential in these kids. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, just being realistic is them knowing they're capable of so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you mentioned earlier, and we talked about this in your last visit to the show too, your kind of personal story and how you really pushed back against
Yeah.
educational system that was kind of holding you back, and you knew you were capable of so much more. And so I guess I'm wondering, that was your experience, and that's who you are, right? And I'm wondering why. Like, what else do we know about nature, nurture? And you have some interesting information in there about attachment. So, what is it about who our children are and the way they come into the world that might make them more prone to this? Is part of it just how they kind of are inherently wired,
Hmm.
their temperament?
Well, I think everything's an interaction for sure.
Mm,
I think there's certainly biological temperaments that predispose us to certain things. Neuroticism is a big personality trait predictor of vulnerable narcissism, and of interpreting all of your life experiences through the lens of this cloud of negativity. And um, I mean, I teach a personality psychology class. I teach about the emerging field of personality neuroscience. There's some really interesting things. I mean, a lot of people have brains that are wired in certain ways. It's to constantly feed them ruminative thoughts. And I'm a very big fan of yes and, not but, and we really can show dramatic personality changes over time. In my class at Columbia in personality, I have students spend half the semester picking one trait they want to change and using scientifically backed personality change interventions. And you see extraordinarily changes in just a span of 6 weeks,
Wow.
where someone every single day tries moving in a particular direction that they want to move in and kind of try to change something. So I think that we shouldn't view these personality dispositions as prisons,
Mm-hmm.
but I think we also need to be aware they exist. And some, a lot of highly sensitive kid, I was one of them for sure. A lot of highly sensitive kids, we don't do them a service in again just coddling them all the time and being like, "Oh, you're a highly sensitive person. Let's treat you as though you're a special angel, and the world will never understand you." And then that child grows up and they view they're like, this is the mentality in life is like, "Oh, no one understands me." It's like, well, it's not everyone's responsibility to appreciate you and understand you. Do you appreciate everyone you meet? It's a two-way street too.
Mm-hmm.
Do you care about everyone you meet? Are you a kind human? There are a lot of highly sensitive a-holes in the world,
Yeah.
that we've raised to be a-holes because we've taught them they can't do anything wrong. It's okay. You're a
Mm-hmm.
highly sensitive person. You can do whatever you want. And so I think kind of putting something, teaching important boundaries and teaching and saying you can do this, as much as we can as parents, as opposed to I know you can't do this, which is what I see rampant in special ed programs, resource room programs. It's a constant stream of telling the student, I understand you can't do this. So get 2x time on the test. So, this and this and this and this, as opposed to, wait, I think you can do this. I would love to see a little bit more of that infused into our school system in special ed programs.
Yeah. In the book, you referred to learned hopefulness versus learned helplessness, right? And so, is that what you're talking about here? That we can often over accommodate or give our kids the idea, whether intentional or not, that they aren't as capable as they are.
Well, learned hopefulness is, well, first of all, I should say hope is something that you do have to learn in a lot of ways. It's not something that's coming inborn in us where we just were born with hope for everything. Although some people do have a hopeful temperament. It's true. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
But all of us, um, there's a very human primal instinct when there's a challenge to fall into a state of helplessness. Martin Seligman and colleagues who came up with this theory of learned helplessness found out when they studied humans, not when they were studying rats or shocking rats and dogs, but when they started shocking humans. Messed up, messed up
Mm-hmm.
research paradigm they did there. But
Yeah.
anyway, it's true. As that when they're shocking humans, they discovered that humans actually, their default state was helplessness. That's not what was learned. Hope is what had to be learned in order for the humans to realize that they were in this open prison, that they were in this mental prison, but they actually could leave whenever they wanted. In order to discover that required more higher order cognitive processes to come online that were intentional and conscious. But left to its own devices, the brain and the subcortical structures and the way we evolved, it's constantly pulling us into this helplessness mentality. That's why I want to be very clear it's a dynamic mindset. You know how I said that in the beginning? I say
Mm-hmm.
it because it's not a book about um, just your ex-husband, who's a narcissist, right? This is about, all of us. This is
Yeah.
about how all of us can fall prey to this mindset. Now, my publishers were very concerned that the book wouldn't sell well because it's saying that maybe the problem is you a little bit, and no
Mm-hmm.
one wants to hear that. No one wants
Mm-hmm.
to hear that. No one wants to. They love the books that say you're badass. You are the book. Those are the bestsellers. You are badass, or your ex-husband's and like nothing's wrong with you. It's all your ex-husband's fault. Like people love those books, and
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to change, if you personally are fed up with these patterns of behavior that you keep getting into over and over and over again, you have to realize at a certain point, the common denominator among all those situations is you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so much more empowering, I think, to take ownership over that and change. If I have a book that didn't sell well, I don't blame the world. I don't blame my readers and say, oh, they don't appreciate my greatness. No, I sit down. I say, what can I do better next time? What in my next book, how can I hire an editor next time? How can I be more accessible? Right? That's the only way you're going to progress and learn and grow. It's going to feel good. It's going to feel better to blame the world and to be like, oh, haters going to hate, that attitude feels good. I
Mm-hmm.
know. I know. I
Mm-hmm.
like that attitude too
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. It feels
Mm-hmm.
good. Hate is going to hate. However, does that help you grow? Does that attitude help you grow? The hater is going to hate attitude. Does that help you grow?
Yeah. No. No. And when I started reading the book, I'm like, oh, this is such an important book in the world right now, which it is. And I was like, about those people,
I
right?
know you did.
And you go through, you say, like, just listen to what I'm going to say, and see, you're going to identify with some of these characteristics of someone of a victim mindset. And of course I did. And that was right there. It was like, oh yeah. And not that I'm being called out, but it was, and it didn't put me on the defense. It made me feel like, oh yeah, there's a lot of room here for all of us to evolve, right?
Oh, there's so much room for people to evolve. I really believe so much more in people's potential than I think they believe in themselves often. I'm a self-actualization coach. And I built up a program. We do a 6 month training program for coaches on how to be a self-actualization coach. And I want to start training teachers on how to be they view themselves as not just teachers, but self-actualization coaches. And what you see just over and over again, and our clients are stuck in this mentality. And when you're stuck in this mentality, you're not focusing on the ways you can improve. You're so
Mm-hmm.
stuck on this notion that you're the you're at the final stage and people don't just recognize your greatness. There's this implicit assumption, like it's the world's fault. I don't need to change. But I think all of us can constantly be changing and
Mm-hmm.
growing and being better on a day-to-day basis. If I choose to go to the gym this week, just in that one moment, I've made a choice that I'm not gonna, blame the world for why I'm overweight. I'm gonna do something
Mm-hmm.
about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And, as you said, it can feel better. It can feel more uncomfortable to go outside of that. It can feel safer to kind of stay hooked
Yeah,
on. You talk about cognitive fusion, staying hooked on our negative emotions. And
absolutely.
I recognize that in a lot of our kids too, right?
Really?
Because it can be really, it's strong, right? And it can feel safe. It can keep our world small, which for some of our kids might feel a lot safer.
I love that. Um, yeah, look, parents are so compassionate, a lot of them. And that's their goal is to keep their child safe. That's their primary objective.
Mm-hmm.
I get it, and
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. You want to keep your child safe. And you also want to teach them the skills of getting outside their comfort zone
Yeah.
and discovering who they are.
Yeah.
Because safety is not the zone where you discover who you really are. You only discover it when you're challenged, or you're in an environment where you have to stand up for yourself, or you're in an environment where you are with people who are better than you in something and you discover where you are relative to them. I mean, there's a million ways in which only by challenging and getting out of the safety zone do you figure out what you're capable of.
Yeah. 1,000%. So I guess what I wanted to ask is, I just interviewed Dr. Sharon Celine about rejection sensitive dysphoria, which we know,
Amazing.
um, a lot of ADHD kids struggle with. It's something I'm familiar with in my family unit, and I really see the impact of it. And so these are kids, people who really can have this heightened sensitivity to criticism, perceived criticism. And so when I was listening to your book, I was thinking about this idea of really feeling like the world is conspiring against you.
That's right. That's
So I'd love
exactly
to
right.
know your thoughts on the relationship between RSD and a victim mindset.
I think there's a really strong link there. Um, there's also a strong link between vulnerable narcissism, which I never properly defined for your audience, but vulnerable narcissism is a form of entitlement to special privileges because you see yourself as more fragile than everyone else. And so you think because of that, you deserve special privileges. They go way beyond just accommodations for, like, I'm not just talking about someone who's disabled and they need a ramp. I don't say they're a vulnerable narcissist, but I'm saying it's a mentality you get in where everywhere you go, it's, for instance, like, because I have dyslexia, I shouldn't have to wait in line at Starbucks. Like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
what? No, everyone in this line has their own Meshuggah. Trust me.
Yeah, yeah.
You're not, it's not like you're, like, it is a form of narcissism. And that is actually correlated with borderline personality disorder,
Mm.
interestingly enough. And there's actually a strong correlation there with rejection sensitivity is one of the main characteristics of borderline personality disorder. And so there is this idea that I have to be protected because I can't emotionally deal with the feeling of rejection. These are my defense mechanisms, and I deserve special resources because people aren't aware of how crazy I'll get if I, get rejected, or if, there's so many different ways of being rejected. So that's a broad label, but where people aren't treating me as special in a way. There's a big difference between being rejected and being treated as special. It's a wide gulf, but for people with rejection sensitivity, it's very black and white to them. So they're either getting the attention they want or they're being rejected. Yet that's not actually how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
I talk in the book about how there's a strong correlation between having a victim mindset and having a hostile attribution bias. And in I'll explain what that means. So what that means is that you'll tend to see hostile intent in ambiguous stimuli. So let's say someone's just not smiling. Like, you talk to them, and they have a neutral facial expression.
Mm-hmm.
People with this intense rejection sensitivity or vulnerable narcissism will view that as an act of aggression on the other person's part.
Wow.
They kind of, yeah, because they kind of just expect, you gotta treat me with respect. And it's like, calm
Mm-hmm.
down. Look, no, they don't. No, people don't have to treat you anyway. Like, no, they don't. And I mean, of course they don't. I don't agree with aggression, but not everyone has to like you, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I have this there's a quote that came out the other day with this Instagram thing saying, where I said something like, people don't realize how wonderful rejection can be. And I was on this show called Last Meal with Tom Nash, and I said that, and so they put that infographic up. And I don't think people really get that rejection is such a wonderful thing. It can be, because it's all rejection is a redirection of your energies, of your potential, your growth. And if something doesn't resonate with your vibe, often you're probably not resonating with that vibe. But yet with people with rejection sensitivity, rarely ask themselves the question, do I even want to be friends with this person?
Yeah.
They get so hung up on, why is this person ignoring me? They don't even ask the question, well, okay, let's say this person wanted to be your best friend. Would you really love that situation?
Mm-hmm.
You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
exactly. Yeah.
I just taught a whole lecture on this in my Science of Living Well class yesterday, on how to have no beep beeps to give.
Yeah.
Yeah, how to overcome your excessive people pleasing tendencies. I gave him an 8-step plan, and that was one of the things.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I've had this conversation with my kiddo too. It's like, if you flip it around, there are plenty of people that I would rather not spend time with, right? And that's fair. I'm not for everybody. And, that's just, nobody is for everybody. That would be exhausting.
I'm definitely not for everybody. I told my class, I said, I feel like 75% of this class, we're all having fun, and you get it. And then 25% of you are like, what the fuck is going on right now? Who is this guy? And I'm like, and I said, I'm okay with that. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on the Full
That's
Tilt
right. I'll
pod.
beep it out. No
Beep, beep,
worries.
beep, beep.
It's all good. It's all good.
Parents, can't possibly hear curse words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just started a Substack that's more about, it's not for Tilt. It's more about me as a human, as a mom, as a writer,
Oh,
as just the whole person that I am. And I swore in my first post and it was very freeing. So
yay. I
I
love that for
appreciated
you,
that. Yeah.
Debbie.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a real moment. So, okay, you write about an empowerment mindset. So, because I want to shift before we wrap up, because, we've spent a lot of time talking about the victim mindset and it is fascinating. And the whole second half of the book is how do we shift this? So it's very practical. But how would you describe an empowerment mindset?
Yeah, it's really embracing that yes and mindset where we recognize something difficult has happened to us, and we also believe in our higher potential for change. So we don't just stop there with the "woe is me," you know. We we also empower ourselves. We don't wait for someone to empower us. Think that we often wait too long for someone else to believe in us or for someone else to tell us it's okay. And we're allowed to have some self talk and self kindness and self empowerment for ourselves. And that's another part of this equation that often
Yeah.
gets ignored.
Yeah, and I was wondering, we had Dr. David Yeager on the show a while ago to talk about his new work with growth mindset. And so when I was reading about the empowerment mindset, I was wondering how would you say it's different and or similar to a growth mindset?
I'd say they're similar, but they're different also in some important ways. David Eager, obviously a great psychologist, has done a lot of work with kids and changing their lives by changing their thoughts about their potential to change their intelligence and their abilities. Um, Empowerment mindset is broader. Growth mindset, at least the way that Carol Dweck has studied it traditionally. I mean, it's really an academic setting, and it's in my view, I've had my own criticisms of growth mindset work. It's a little too focused on performance. Have a growth mindset about your abilities, about your achievement, about your, test scores. That's not my focus. My focus is about growth as a whole person. So when I talk about an empowerment mindset, I'm talking about the ways of thinking that help you overcome life's challenges in ways that recognizes the suffering and has a lot of love for yourself and compassion for yourself and what you've been through, like a friend, and also is constantly trying to get you to believe in your potential for change, and that change doesn't always lead to higher achievement. Like that
Hmm.
change can lead to greater connections. That change can lead to greater um, uh, creativity. Just so a greater sense of purpose. So many things in your life.
Yeah, and I just want to say for listeners too that there's so much hope here. So if you're raising a kid and you're listening, and maybe you're also recognizing yourself in this conversation, but if are parenting a kid who is kind of stuck, in a victim mindset or, has that proclivity to negative feelings and getting stuck there. That's not the end of the story. Like there are a lot of ways
Right.
that our kids can shift. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts for parents on how they could support this healthy development of an empowerment mindset in their kids.
Well, I think play yes and a lot more with your kids.
Mm.
When they come home and they're crying about failing a test, really embrace the yes end of that. Like yeah, that you didn't do your best this time. And we're immediately going to go in a mode where we're going to be constructive and figure out, I know you can do better than this, or coming home. I mean, I think there's this instinct from parents to just be so nurturing that they just want to take all the, I know, pain and suffering away from their child. I think my mom was like that. She was very overprotective. She wanted to make sure that I never suffered, never had any pain, and I think that that's unrealistic to expect that out of life. But um, we can really do a lot. I think parents can really do a lot uh, to show them other ways of coping and dealing with situations that involve healthier emotion regulation and better cognitive like overcoming cognitive distortions, which I think kids have a lot of when they come home. They have overgeneralizing. Yeah, I think parents would really do well to read my book and read the different kinds of cognitive distortions that people can have, and I think kids have them on, up the kazoo.
Totally. Yeah.
Overgeneralizing, black and white thinking,
Catastrophizing. Yeah.
catastrophizing.
Just,
Yeah.
yeah. I agree. Like, and I also, think that that can be reinforced with the way a lot of our kids are spending time in, online communities and Discord groups, and they're spending a lot of time online, and they might find groups that are reinforcing those mindsets or those distortions, because they're finding each other, right? And it's validating and feels good in that moment. And I just want to say too, you talk about emotional flexibility is the what we're looking for here, because you talk about the perils of avoiding negative feelings, and so we want our kids to learn not to suppress their negative feelings, or to avoid them, but to learn how to move through them. And as I'm reading that, I'm thinking also, like, yeah, I really had to learn how to be okay with my negative feelings, and I try to model that now. And I would think that's also an area that parents could be modeling their own emotional flexibility, so their kids can start to realize it's okay to feel these things.
Yeah, well, you're spot on. We also don't realize the extent to which a lot of these things are genetically passed down to your children. So parents who maybe score very high in neuroticism, if their child shows a lot of traits of neuroticism, the parent might be like, "What have I done wrong in my parenting?" It's like the only thing you've done wrong is you've given them your genes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, let's be honest. Like it's sometimes the field of behavioral genetics shows that parenting matters a lot less than we think it does,
Yeah.
within the normal range. Of course, when it comes to trauma and abuse, that's a whole different story. But yeah, within a normal range of parenting. So recognizing, as a parent, recognizing these traits in yourself
Hmm.
and thinking about and working to change your own traits, and then teaching your children how to change their traits. That's the way. That's the way. That's the
That
way.
is the way. This is the way. Let me ask you one more question and then we'll wrap up. I thought this section on character strengths was really interesting. So can you talk about the relationship of character strengths and helping our kids kind of consider those, or maybe the way that we acknowledge those in our kids in terms of helping them develop more of an empowerment mindset?
Oh, heck yes. There's a website, the Via Institute, where you can find out your top character strengths, and being able to lead and with your character strengths, be mindful of what your top character strengths are, allows you greater freedom to bring those character strengths to bear on any tricky, challenging situation. Maybe your character strengths are creativity, humor, and bravery. Well, teach the children that instead of having to fall apart every time something makes them uncomfortable, remind them you have humor, bravery, and creativity to handle this situation. That's pretty badass.
Mm-hmm.
You know, keep the top three character strengths up on a wall.
Mm.
In your house. Just every time the child comes home and they're like crying, they're like, "Oh, Sarah rejected me for the middle school dance." Point to the wall. Or, "Oh, I gotta be on the exam." Point to the wall. Don't even
Mm-hmm.
answer. Just point to the wall. Just keep reminding them. Keep
Yeah.
reminding them
Mm-hmm.
that, like there are still higher parts of themselves that they can bring to bear in any situation they may have forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah. And listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes because I believe there is a character strengths test or assessment specifically for kids, at least teens. That might be a
There
little
is.
different than the one that adults take, but it is fascinating. And the thing is, they're all strengths and we all have them. So I think it can be really powerful. So I'll include that in the show notes. Scott, is there anything before we say goodbye that for,
Oh,
this show. I know it's been so
the way
fun.
you said that.
I'm sorry. um,
I
but
have
you,
rejection sensitivity. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
but knowing the audience who's listening to this show, and your, relationship with twice exceptionality and, in this community, is there any kind of last thoughts that you would want to leave listeners with?
Well, as you know, I've been a big advocate of 2E minds um, for a very long time, and I see this research extremely pertinent to people who are feeling this dual identity, where on the one hand they're like, well, I have a lot of limitations, but then on the other hand, I know I can do this, this, and this. And a lot of this just goes down to the same sort of thread of breaking down those false dichotomies, or viewing yourself as only the worst thing that's happened to you, which I see is happening a lot in our society right now. People reducing their identity to the worst part of themselves. And so a big part of this is encompassing the whole of who you are, not leaving any of it behind, and still acknowledging the limitations and constantly pointing to the higher potential. And it's really bringing it all together in a lot of
Mm.
ways.
Mm. So good. Thank you. I'm going to name your book again because I do encourage listeners to check it out. It's called Rise Above, Overcome a Victim Mindset, Empower Yourself and Realize Your Full Potential. And I have to ask you, like, what are you working on next?
Well, I'm focusing a lot on teaching now to a greater degree I ever have before. I have a full course load, and that keeps me
Wow,
quite busy.
I bet.
And I also am a professional mentalist, magician. So I'm putting together a big show, on that combines the science of human potential with magic and mentalism and music and all
Oh,
sorts of stuff. So I'm working on a show. Yeah.
that's exciting. Awesome. Okay. Well, Scott, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you today.
Thank you,
And yeah, I
Debbie.
just appreciate your time.
Thank you.